One of the important jobs that you have as the architect is that you have to have the allegiance to the project, not to the client. Sometimes what the client think or say is not always in the best interest of the project, which they themselves later realize. The core ideas are fully resolved, but the project is a mess.
What factors should one consider before they start their own practice?
The only way to start is to start small, unless you inherit something. For part of skills is required. None of us knew how to deal with clients, how to fetch projects. We have never done that. A well-meaning, hardworking, sincere person is much more valuable than somebody with enormously or highly intelligent. I think that people who want to contribute something, the practical things are their willingness to learn, adapt, work in new environment is much more.
Hello everyone. Today our guest is Mr. Ruturaj Parikh. Ruturaj is an architect by profession. He co-founded Studio Matter with Mansi in 2014. Matter is an architecture design and curatorial studio based in Goa. Ruturaj's diverse career includes roles at Charles Courier Foundation and Indian Architect and Builder magazine. He has authored the book Works and Continuities, a monograph of Brinda Somaya's practice. In this episode, we'll be talking to him about his views on industry, education of architects, and lessons on entrepreneurship from his experience. So, let's get started.
Hi, Rituraj. A very warm welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, so thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to contribute. I went through the previous published episodes, and I feel it's a very important platform. So, congratulations for what you're doing.
Thank you for the kind word. So, today we'll be talking to you about your views on industry, entrepreneurship, education. But before starting all this, I would like to touch upon your background a little bit.
I did my bachelor's of architecture, Vallabh Vidyanandar, IED, which was a 25-year-old old school that I had joined, founded by Suryakan Patel, a very respected architect in that part of the world. After I graduated, I worked professionally with an Ahmedabad-based studio. Just before my graduation, I had the opportunity to work with Dharmesh Jadeja's firm in Auroville. That was my first exposure to working professionally.
Okay.
And that exposure has shaped a lot of my views. After graduation, I worked with Intact as well for some time in Jaisalmer on the Jaisalmer heritage project. It was a documentation job. Then I moved to Bombay and joined Indian Architect and Builder magazine. Time IB was one of the largest circulation professional journal magazine in India, focused on architecture and design. Also had a very known conference called 361 Degrees. So both me and Manthi very early on and sort of co-editors of the magazine and curators of the conference. After a few years at IAB, we decided to move on, and that is when I was offered the role of the director of Charles Courier Foundation here in Goa, and that's how we moved to Goa.
Oh,
Once we moved here, we had a small project in collaboration with Zoa architect Pradeep Jayeshi, who are based in Sri Lanka. They had a project here for which we were approached to kind of represent, their practice to an extent, their design, and but also act as local architect. But then our scope extended in that project, and that became our first small project to start with. And after that, work started trickling in slowly. Uh, our practice sort of developed as I moved on from the Charles Courier Foundation. Parallelly, in 2015, we set up um, the portal, the Think Matter portal, as you know now, the publishing. And because both me and Mansi came from a publishing background, we were always keen to have that. In fact, that was what we were keen on doing. The architecture practices is more incidental and organic, but that was very intended and very clear. And that's how Matter was established in 2014, October. We kind of registered the form, and then slowly it has developed into what it is today. That background.
Okay. Your focus is both on media house and studio practice.
Well, I would not call us a media house. We are not like a traditional media house. Very much like you, our work comes from more our own interest in doing things and in being connected and learning from other people, platforming good work that comes from India,
Okay.
rather than actually focusing on the media and the
Yeah.
feminism aspect. Sometimes we don't have separate teams working on two things. We have the same team working on everything.
Oh, okay.
So that is the nature of work here, and that has its own challenges, but it also creates a very rich environment in the studio, I
Mm.
feel. Generally, like our larger interest is to kind of live in the world of ideas and then help
Mm.
everyone, the people who work with us grow because they are exposed to ideas like this.
Right.
So our content practice and our design practice kind of keep, like there's never a 50-50 sort of balance.
Yeah, got it.
Some months we have a lot of, yeah, like through monsoon, we do a lot of content work because our projects are sort of, then, some months we are frenetically chasing deadlines on design projects.
Mm.
Keeps in between
Right.
the two.
I think that's a really good practice. So, in your opinion, why are architects in India struggling despite a boom in the construction and decor industry?
Well, I'm not sure that would be a right characterization of the profession in general because I feel that you can say that for any profession. Engineers have their own struggle, and so do chartered accountants. So it's not so much to do the way the industry is shaped. I think it also depends on a lot of personal choices. I think a lot of work that happens in urban centers is fairly saturated. Unless you are willing to look at the fringes, work on tier two, tier three cities, establish your practices elsewhere. If you're adamant that you would want to be in Bombay, and that too, I know many good firms who operate out of the big city but have built all over. So it's not. I mean, I would not say that there is a struggle. I mean, there is struggle obviously in any discipline. In the last at least 15 years, there has been a significant boom, as you put it, in the construction, interior design, etc., in industry in general. And there's a lot of work that is being done, and a lot of work to be done. And we know a lot of young practices or young people who have organized their practices around these tier two or tier three towns, who have very intentionally ventured into doing public projects, or who have set up very conceptual kind of practices, who deal with certain core issues that plague our country. So there is always work to be found. It's just that I feel that conventional of practice in general are being less and less relevant now. So maybe that, if you read that as a slump, yes, that's true. Because the traditional practice model, which had this sort of top-down pyramidal approach, that is being broken now. People don't work like that anymore. It become way more collaborative, way more mental, organic. People are also looking at architects to be more open to having a larger team work on projects, have more expert deal with areas of expertise that contribute to the project. So if you are very keen on the conventional mode of practice, that was something that happened in the 90s when the economy, the new money was all flowing in and it was all new. But the same mode of practice may not be relevant anymore. Why people feel lost. We also felt, and we also feel like that because the assumptions that you make when I was working in Ahmedabad in a studio, the kind of frameworks that we saw in which architects practice are very different from what they are now or what we are doing now. Our role has become much more specific, focus. Our ability to work with other people has become much more important, and as we go, it will become more and more important. And as the projects become larger, teams grow, things like that. So that practice, which was organized in a corporate sort of way, wherein you have the principal and the associates, and that would may not be. We may have to all change. So that is the struggle. In the traditional mode, yes, I don't know. I mean, if you want to look, if you're looking for a job in kind of a practice, yes, there are still practices who operate in that paradigm. But it's not the same work. That's what I.
Okay, so that's a very interesting thing that we have pointed out. I understand traditional practices are not working anymore. Really, new laws which are coming up, are they doing something different or are they still following those traditional methods?
Firms that are producing good work certainly are doing something different. They're not operating in the same paradigm as our 90s practice or the prima donna practices, where the principal architect is the face and the fountainhead of all work. That is not true anymore. And I don't think any good contemporary practice can claim complete, they can have that kind of claim on work. We all have to create, like, operate in a very fluid sort of world. And that younger people have adapted quite differently to this new reality. And also, it is the kind of work you seek. If you seek the kind of work where you end up largely dealing with private projects and commissioned clients, basically building within plot, then that is a very different kind of practice. And much of the good work is actually coming out of other modes where architecture did not produce like that. Clients now are NGOs and government bodies and collaborate. Even as clients, there are companies that you have to deal with, multiple people who have opinions. So it is the same one-to-one interaction that you have. That itself changes the mode of practice, because then different people at different stages have all these crisscrossing relationships which actually form the path. So that way, I think the lot of contemporary firms, at least the ones that we are interested in or who are doing good work, have a very different way of looking at the world. And the problems are also different. I mean, in the 90s, it was critical to figure out a way to survive simply month after month. But that is not the challenge anymore. I mean, of course, survival is critical, but not in the same terms. It is more you want to thrive in the kind of work that you want to do now. And therefore, that old model of practice, which was solely dependent on the aspirations of who the principal architect is and who has set up the practice, is also changed, because now, what I want to do with the practice is just one part of it. But there are a lot of people in the practice who want to do other things with it. They get to do it. That's from the question, right? So yeah, so that way, it's a new world, I feel, and it's just the beginning of that new world. And as we go, I think the traditional mode of the corporate practice will diminish. It will become more collaborative, open, and a lot of large practices abroad, even in India, are kind of starting to change that mode and starting to adapt to this new reality, because they are finding that the newer clients are also not the same as the kind of client they had.
They are more demanding these days. They are demanding so much more work in lesser time.
Yeah, everybody's in a bit of a rush. Uh, but one of the important jobs that you have as the architect is that you have to have the allegiance to the project, not so much to the client. The clients are a part of that larger ecosystem in which the project happens. Of course, they are very important collaborators on the project because their intention is what brings the project to life. However, having the professional expertise to look at architecture differently than the client, I feel a lot of effort and work goes in slowing things down, resisting some very immediate needed reactionary kind of decisions that are being made. Impatience, everybody wants to get things done quickly or down, etc. Those things. And I've always felt that all the projects that we have done in some sort of phase have not been as rich. Of course, you can't take forever to do things, but time is also important. You have to nurture things a little differently. And I find a lot of times that it falls on us to slow things down. When Prem is talking about it, his context is different because the projects that they handle are much larger and the challenges are very different from what we are doing. From my perspective, I feel that we have to be fully aligned to the project. Sometimes what the client think or say is not always in the best interest of the project, which they themselves later realize. If we let go, then we get dragged into decisions that are taken in haste and not completely thought through. That is something we I have to get this. Because that kind of process has its own problems. And when it happens with a lot of times, it's a difficult. But yeah, he's right here. Everybody's in a rush. I don't know how to deal with that. And we are also figuring out.
So, what do you think architects should do differently over the coming decade?
First, I think would be to figure out newer modes in which one can practice. There is a lot of people we know have hybrid models, They practice, they teach, they have research components in their work, they document things for the studio. They have their own. The practice is not simply office that provides the service. I feel it has, like, if you look at practices of people like Doshi or Korea, like the first generation practice, much beyond producing the work that they produce, they have a cultural significance. They questioned conventions, ventured into territories that were not previously explored. They got both concerns of poverty and resources back then when people were not talking about, but all the while doing very beautiful eloquent work. So somehow their body of work is not like a project after a project. It's almost like the entire practice is a cultural contribution. So if you see the work from that more, you're not really providing a service to an extent. Yes, you're being commissioned work, and then the larger agenda is also to kind of have some degree of custodianship toward what's happening around you, some degree of concern beyond the work. Even in a small way, it is to deal with people who work on sites or contractors. How can you create some sort of ecosystem where people get to work, get to do good work? So those are smaller contributions that a practice can make. And in the next decade, I feel that a lot of focus would go into this looking at new and hybrid models of work, not the traditional, you know, again, not a traditional service, providing a service sort of practice, more to do with what is a larger concern kind of practice. Um, that also changes the way a lot of younger people are working. I mean, for them, looking at the practice becomes a vehicle for their worldview, and vice versa. It becomes a kind of a departure through which things filter into their world. So it is not simply that, to a lot of people we know who are doing good work, it's not simply that they're waiting for the client to approach them and start the project. But they are going out, associating with NGOs, figuring out how to do good things in small scale. Even if it is like interior design, there are people who are trying to figure out resource conscious, longevity, detail. Well, these are also important concerns. So people are, I can see that, including us, it's a struggle. I mean, we still have to operate in that traditional exchange of providing a service and creating sustenance out of it. But that is not the transitory kind of relationship we have with the world. That is now just a small part of it. The larger part is something else. That something else is for everybody to figure out.
I recently have been asking this question to many architects. What is your take on turnkey projects? As we said that architects need to diverse in the coming decade. So I have seen many interior designers launching their own product line, and many of the architects are delving into turnkey projects. So what is your take on it?
Well, I have found that for us, sometimes, unless the clients are known to you and there is a significant amount of trust, turnkey projects do not work professionally. Unless you separate your practice from the part that executes and the part that designs. And there is also a bit of a conflict or a professional conflict when you are in charge of executing what you have designed, but also taking a decision on whether or not, in which mode that execution happens. And that creates sometimes a compromise, especially if you are trying to protect interests of both ends of that balancing together. For me, for our studio, we have not yet ventured into that direction. account. Now, it is very different if you have to, like, if somebody gives you an X amount and you have to, the challenge is to execute the whole project in X amount. That not that I think can be considered, because then the managing the whole idea within that amount is your prerogative, and then you bring in your professional expertise. But I feel that when you are providing a professional advice, and you yourself are also the beneficiary of that professional advice, how do you keep your yourself above board, right? And so if I think, that it is in the best interest of the project to use stuff on React, however, on the other end of the spectrum, I think that the budget that we have agreed to for this turnkey project does not allow to. If I can argue my way through, I can say that this is much better, let's go with this, even if it's more expensive. However, if I am the one only paying for it, that argument kind of compromise. It's compromise. So I'm not sure I have not yet figured out a very all above board way of doing turnkey work. And till we figure that mode out, I don't think we want to venture into something like that. There is a temptation that, it's easier, you're dealing with yourself, you can quickly finish work, get paid, close projects, etc. But also for a small firm like us, there is significant risk involved in that mode of work. So finally, we also want to create an ecosystem where we are very clear that no matter what goes wrong, and of course many things go wrong with projects, we have always acted in the best interest of the project. That there has never been a doubt in my mind that did we not take a decision in the best interest of project because we are protecting our interest. So there can never be that kind of a. So in turnkey projects, those important points get blurred. But that's why I have some reservation. But of course, you can provide. I mean, if it's a small job and if the work is like a closed environment sort of thing, like if you are commissioned to design a piece of furniture, then I imagine that mode becomes simpler. Then of course, it is also important for the clients that they pay a certain amount and entrust that end to end is delivered. And then to create a complexity in that kind of mode is also not fair. So yes, it is true that in smaller projects it may work, but as the scale becomes larger and as you start protecting two ends of the same kind of ecosystem, I don't know how to do that. I'm not very sure.
Notion of star architect. And I'm asking this in the context of this being one of the reasons why architects do not collaborate within themselves.
For again, the kind of practices that were established in the sort of modernist ethos, they're very different and hinged on the idea that the founded or the genius of the practice is the principal architect or whosoever has established the practice. And that is why there were a lot of name practices. We always knew people as the first name practice. However, that model of celebrating and work is also completely irrelevant now, because the practice requires so many people to have an input in project that I personally cannot claim complete and absolute authorship of it anymore.
Right.
And therefore, simply by that mode and that complexity, practices have to move away from that personality driven model, for sure. Still, yes, you as a principal architect or as a director of the practice, you are significantly more responsible for what is happening than anybody else in the office. So work does stop on you. But that whole, again, people don't seek us out because they think I am a genius. But they see the work that the practice has produced, perspective of me. And a lot of times I meet clients who have never seen me, never seen my face, never read about what I think. They simply have seen previous project or have a reference and then they seek us out. So now that mode is changing. There was a time when that seemed to be relevant. People also saw a practice as part professional service, part artistic endeavor. So therefore, the authorship and the genius of production and the fountainhead of idea and all that ideas are pretty relevant, but not anymore. You can see that a lot of offices and practices were still stuck in that idea, are struggling to get out of that. You know, if your founding architect is like 85 years old, they can't keep producing that stuff. Certain offices who were named practices have slowly started to move out of that model because now there are many other associates and all who independently handle projects. It's a dated idea of practice, and that is also why a prize like the Pritzker is becoming less and less relevant. There was one like when we were in college every year when they announced Pritzker, there was almost like a jubilation around it. And there was a lot of expectation around who will win prize that year. Now I think there's hardly any. Uh, I mean, it's again insignificant. There are better award which celebrate work in a different mode than you know like awarding the genius of one individual. And those awards and have brought forth a much more meaningful work than let's say the Princeton has in the last 10, 12 years. So it is true that even in popular imagination, the I, practices which look on the personality of a single individual have find little meaning. Of course, you can see that in these big conferences and things, people keep speaking the same thing. That it will take time for that model to become completely another. Because we also view world in the same way. We think an individual genius can achieve that, but that's not really where things are going anymore. In the same spirit as what we were talking previously, with the change of the model of practice, where things are becoming much more colorful and much more intrusive, fluid, nebulous, then the focus on one person as the driving force of the creative outcome of a practice seems also to be fairly redundant.
So, if we can say decentralization of power and accessibility towards new idea, internet had a lot to do with this. Content has a lot to do with this, right?
Yeah, what you mentioned is important. That decentralization, no, even if you look at it, this election, for example, it was all about that.
Yeah.
You realize the limit of a personality, no matter how big the machinery behind creating that personality is. There is a limit to how that impacts what people think is important. On a magnanimous national scale, also it doesn't work.
If I talk about the education institutes which are still taking the 40-year or 60-year-old approach. So, how do we as practitioners address this problem?
One of the issues with a lot of educational institutes, especially that we see now, is Hawkeye focus on developing skills. The sort of the 90s education model of the problems, especially when you want to create a professional practice ecosystem, which ties to practitioners in offices outside of the school. However, that also has its own workplace because I feel that skills are acquired. I mean, you can do a 6-week crash course and learn the software. And these things change also very quickly. Just last decade, we were thinking that we will need like 20 people to create an illustration. And now we just kind of imagine something and the computer does it. So that is how the tech behind things moves very far. If you completely focus on skill as the primary agenda of education, then you risk being outdated because things move very fast in different directions. However, not that they are not required. I think one of the questions you have written down is about this whole focus on drawing by hand, and it is, and I feel it is very critical. I mean, although some colleges are moving on, although 90% of work in our studio itself is done on the computer, I still need to have that interface because the direct connection that the hand has with the mind, it cannot be substituted with multiple intermediate, tools. The hand is the primary tool, to experience that, to kind of think. So, so it is true that indispensable values or skills or processes that enable one to become a more sensitive, more considerate, more aware architect have to be embedded within the education system, and we cannot substitute that with something else. So that core competence or core knowledge, once that central spine is in place, then everything can be fairly open. And if you look at, other disciplines like law or medicine, they do that all the time. While there is a very strong core knowledge base, it also has an tremendous input from skill, and it is fairly repetitive. You have to kind of read through a lot of material. But finally, what distinguishes a good doctor from a bad doctor, a good lawyer from bad lawyer, is how they see the world. And that is why lawyers just don't make arguments based on the law. They make arguments based on their interpretation of the law. Otherwise, it would always be very clear what has been. And I think as a professional, you have to have that ability to an extent to have a worldview. And the shaping of that worldview significantly happens when you study or when you are at school. Your value systems get articulated to an extent. Your ethical understanding of what is right and wrong gets clarified. You find what you are interested in. What am I going to do finally? Not as a professional, but just as a human being, like living on this earth. What is it that really excites you? All that discoveries happen in education. So somehow that is also another aspect. A very technical core to it. And arts is design is probably a rare discipline which has that. You have a technical core, but you also have this world of ideas. So the ability to engage with this world of ideas is equally important. If you create students who are able to do that, they will adapt to what is coming. They will be able to find their voice in the world. But if you simply create a professional, you create people who are then very easily replaceable. And therefore, then the prize goes to the lowest bidder. And that is one of the issues that we have as well. People are willing to pay very good money for a skill anymore. So they realize, a lot of people realize that skill. However, if you are a thinker, there is a value to what you bring to the project or to whatever it is that you really engage with. And that will change the way you deal with what is like. I don't know, my knowledge of software is 10% to what we use in the office. So I'm not brushed up at all in the last. But I don't think it impedes my ability to design in any way. Because I constantly collaborate with people knowledge of software. However, that in that exchange, I grow my knowledge of the technical ability to do something. And hopefully they grow their or they change their way of looking at the world because of what I bring to the table. I think that to find one, the education in the college, I think to find what you want to do in life is very critical and how you want to deal with the world. And that and there was a tremendous emphasis on something like this when there were fewer schools and we had, like, for example, in our school itself, we had a very well organized liberal art input teach stage through electives and all, but not at the extent of the core knowledge that we have to study. The dual question of teaching and then being professional. You are the same person through. So, what is the kind of person you are? In both cases, what must reflect, or you may be able to find it at some point. But therefore, schools which are very technical and extremely focused on creating professional may not work because as soon as the one batch is out and in 4 years things have changed drastically. Everything has changed. There's a new software out there. There's a new way of looking at things. Or schools which are completely focused on the liberal arts right also don't work to an extent because you still need that core because design is technical, especially if you are somebody who wants to practice. Somehow, and there are good schools who have struck this balance until very recently, even TEPT and all this, like the older institutes who have kind of revived themselves also had that balance. But more and more, we are seeing too much emphasis on large idea takes the focus away from the core technical understanding, comprehension of what architecture is, or too much focus on the technical aspect, which are people have no clue what they present as people. They are simply being employable. And that mode is even more dangerous because then anybody can replace here.
Yeah. So on this employability and scope of institutes, I do have another question. Many people, many practitioners complain that architecture graduates are not employable anymore. Like there are several factors why they say so. And which is
Yeah.
why we talk about the skills that architecture graduate must have, be it if they want to be an entrepreneur or if they want to get employed in it. What is your take on this notion and what skills do you think every architecture graduate must acquire?
So I have in my practice only and through the experience that we have had working in these different offices, I have realized that a well-meaning, hardworking, sincere person is much more valuable than somebody with enormous skill or very intelligent. I'm not sure which. I think that people who want to contribute something to the practice pick up things, their willingness to learn, adapt, work in new environments is much more. When we see this as people who are joining us as employees, and joining us as interns, that if they are people who have the ability to align with our values, contribute, and willingness to contribute to any conversation, you'll always find a role, like let me do this bit, even though I'm not able to do much of it. The willingness to go out and contribute and get outside the comfort zone. Those people thrive, learn much faster, grow much faster, are able to
Any
handle much
skill
more.
then. I mean, if anyone has these qualities, they can learn literally anything.
And and that is what is the most valuable aspect of work, because nobody is equipped. For example, our practice is a bit unique as a model and demands a very different set of skills. We don't think university is equipped to a large extent in those skills. Some people, when they join our firm, learn very fast and this is by how much they are able to grasp the limited time they have spent. Some struggle, and it has nothing to do the struggling, and I don't think it has anything to do with either the curriculum or the intelligence. It is simply to do with going outside the comfort zone, trying to, something that they are something really coming on the out on the other side, I don't know, triumphant. So that way, slow people who learn like in small bits. What is very important is that in terms of the pure values that is sometimes. So in our practice, the people who have not been able to fully adjust work largely have issues that are not professional, but they are more to do with their way of looking at the world simply is too different from and there's we don't want to compromise. So then simply doesn't work. So certain if the core values are aligned, and that happens with clients as well. We have lost project not because the clients are bad or not because the project was not exciting or we were doing anything wrong. It is simply that at some fundamental level, our values were not aligned. But what we sought to do with the project was not something that the clients were looking to, you know, or they thought it's not their concern or something like so that alignment of values is critical and then comes everything else, the willingness to I think what I learned with Mr. Korea was that there is a rigor and hard work required and design or architect is very effortful, not like a napkin sketch kind of a you can't design from the he used to say from the top of your head. So the first thing that comes is really not the thing. Well, that effort, the willingness to put that effort changes everything, really. And we find that students, young professionals, even contractors, some elder contractors that we work on, who are willing to learn and adapt and change, willing to experiment and all, they thrive much more. They get much more work, they get to do much more. Then a lot of people who keep saying that, oh, this is not how we do things, this is not my thing, there's a struggle there. I also like people, young people, like especially now, who have that. It can be flawed, yes, but then at least you grow. You have an opinion, you can contribute to conversation.
Architecture graduates find very difficult to find a job these days. So do you think that there is some thumb rule for them which they can follow and they can land in good position?
I'm not sure about it anymore. I mean, there was a time when things were slower and the skills that you acquired in your college would kind of make you relevant for 10 to 20 years. That's not the reality anymore. Things are changing much faster. So if you focus too much on employability, I don't know that how much that helps. The willingness to adapt to newer things, the willingness to work in a collaborative environment, the willingness to be accessible, make friends, get outside your comfort zone. Those are much more in terms of pure skills. Yes, more than skills, what is important is the comprehension of what it means to be design a building or a space, to think spatially, the ability to think spatially. So when somebody is talking about something, the ability to grasp what that idea is in space is very critical, I think, and that a lot of young people who work with are sort of lack these days, I see. Like, because somehow there are too many tools who take away that simple ability to comprehend or visualize in your mind what is being discussed through a small sketch, a drawing, or something like that. To imagine things in whole, there's a significant emphasis to look at parts as specularization. But if you're talking about the whole big idea, we don't hear much back, because there's a lack of comprehension. And that also, to an extent, comes because a lot of people who teach now, and because there are too many colleges everywhere, have never practiced. And till I practice or till I work in an architecture firm, I was not aware of how to imagine and comprehend space or questions of.
Yeah, and that happens.
And if that is not there, then no matter how skilled you are, you will get it wrong. Skills will not substitute for your ability to clearly visualize, grasp an idea. That ability comes from, again, that is where the education plays a major role, I think. Because the kind of faculty, and for us also, I must say that we had a fairly mediocre set of professors, barring two people, really, who made almost the entire difference. So you don't need too many, you don't need the entire ecosystem at college to be like that also.
Yeah.
You need one or two people who can kind of give that kind of thinking. And that itself can become, that's it. And then you are on your own. So, but it again, this hard, repetitive work is required. Effort, things are effortful. How people imagine. They are not like the kind of, they don't come naturally like that. You have to really work hard. That willingness to do that was primary. And the people who we have come across who have that willingness have outperformed.
Yeah.
Although they have started at a much different skill level, struggled initially, but when they catch up, it's sudden, and then they thrive.
So I have just last question. What factors should one consider before they start their own practice?
I don't know if there's a rule like that, but our practice is completely focused and based on what we are interested in, and it reflects our collective world. It's as simple as that. There is nothing else to it beyond that, I feel, to our practice. I don't think we have strategies and plans and whatever. To an extent, you learn all that, you pick up those skills on your way. especially when you start small.
Mhm.
And the only way to start is to start small, unless you inherit something formal.
Yeah.
So, entrepreneurship has mentioned the word. Part of questions is required. None of us knew how to figure these things out,
Hmm.
how to deal with clients, how to fetch projects. We have never done that. We also still don't know. I personally don't know how to do it on network. What we did probably is that we established the practice around our core info, and we based it on the foundations of our value, what we think is right and we think is wrong, and it reflects our worldview. As more people join, that worldview change, that culture keeps changing. It's negotiable. I mean, of course, not everything is
Yeah,
negotiable.
but just
Sometimes,
the core values are not
yeah,
negotiable, but everything around that can be.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like my way of looking at the world also keeps changing.
Hmm.
So, as other people have inputs on it, and in what will only if you see if in that mode doesn't matter whether I mean we learn from our clients, we learn from our contractors, we learn from our the people who work on our project, we learn from our consultants, we learn from the young people who join our office as interns, or we constantly learn from our colleagues.
Hmm.
In that whole spectrum
Hmm.
of things, I think we learn from everybody who is willing to share, vice versa. The the entrepreneurial ability to run a practice is acquired over time. It kind of follows the way your practice is being shaped and the way it is moving.
Hmm.
You can be very proactive. I was watching a small clip shared today morning by an architect, interior designer in London, and she says that her focus from the very beginning was on the entrepreneurship end of it,
Okay.
on the growth, ability to grow, the business of it. Therefore, whenever there is a choice between putting design as or her ability to be a designer versus her time which is required to focus on growing the practice, you would always give time to grow the practice
Okay.
and not to sit and design. I'm not like that.
But it's not
Um,
wrong to be her also, right?
no, not at all. Not at all. It's a choice you have made.
Hmm.
Again, it's a choice. Your practice is an extension of you or what you think. And not just you as in like me.
Hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
it keeps changing, no? As newer people or as your colleagues think differently. And a lot of times we get stuck into projects. Have it all resolved. We can't work out certain, core ideas.
Hmm.
On the other side, sometimes think the core ideas are fully resolved, but the project is a mess. So it works both ways.
Yeah. Well,
And I don't see it as you can make a conscious choice that for me, what is important is that I make a lot of money, and the practice is apart from doing what it does, is a vehicle of doing that. That's your and to sustain, and you have to pay people well. You have to make sure everybody's comfortable. And a lot of people have aspirations from what they themselves want to do. So is also the practice is also a vehicle for them to meet those
yeah.
expectations. So it is not just so it's a growing thing. So there is no model that is bad as long as you are ethically clear. You have a sense of right or wrong, that you do not somehow compromise on that. And a lot of times, practice does demand a significant compromise on that aspect, which sometimes I feel people shouldn't do. So you yourself realize that this is not why I set up this practice, not to do this kind of stuff. So it can works on in all directions. I like to give you a small example. We do not tolerate insult or insulting language
Okay.
towards us or towards anybody else.
Okay.
It can be harsh,
Yeah.
yes. If you are a practitioner, you can be tough. You have to be tough, but you can't,
Inside. You do have
be
the right to
insulting.
do that. Yes.
Yeah. So you have to be tough, and you have to kind of call people out on things. But and especially of course, sometimes I also it happens to me. I lose my cool. I think, and then I have to back. I have to make fix things
Hmm.
that are broken because of that. I think in all practices it involves other people.
Hmm.
Although a lot of practices are led by very powerful people who have singular ideas of what they want to pursue. Like lady whose video I was watching today. And there's nothing wrong in it. It is fine if she sees her practice as a office providing certain service, and her idea of growth is very different from our idea also.
Yeah.
So it is not, we can't have that conversation, because if she thinks growth comes from making more money every year, or having more employees every year, or doing more square feet of work every year, that is her idea of growth. I don't think that's my idea of growth in general. So I think apart from creating more resources and means for us to sustain and live in the world, we have to grow in the kind of challenges that we are going to take on.
Yeah. Okay.
So our projects should be more complex. We should seek out more meaningful work that has more impact. I would like my practice to have people, not just me, to better everybody's life who works with us. Slowly. I am not a believer in overnight tactical. It is growth on our terms. For me, those things are important. It's not measurable in the simple dynamic of how much money is in our bank account at the end of the year, or how much tax we pay, or how many square feet of work we do. The success of the project also depends purely a lot on its impact.
Yeah.
Whether we have, from simple things like whether we have clients who are really happy with sometimes they're not. We really screw up. We have to fix that. I have never walked away from anything. We have to take responsibility. All those are part of the big idea. So to me, growth is a better quality of life year by year in all terms. Even for the people who work with us, our contractors, teams, everybody must experience some satisfaction and some reward. I would like to make more money. There's no doubt about that. But that is not the core focus in all projects that we do. It is a happy outcome of it, that we are able to sustain better, buy better things, have a better quality of life. A lot of times I always have something in my mind, which is the next step. Like I would tell some close friends and clients that we have, that the day we buy a plotter, we have arrived. And last year we bought a plotter. But then that's not the end of it.
Yeah, of course. So
when the
smaller
next
steps
thing,
to a big destination.
Yeah, that's exactly how you put it. So it is like that. When 10 years back, we were working out of practically a single table in a 2-table firm. But the other table was a different firm altogether. We just share. Yeah, it was just one table, 4 10. From there, incrementally, we have our own space. We have more resources at our disposal. We have a greater autonomy and independence. In some cases, yes. I like in content work, a lot of times we want to do something. We have a great idea, and then we go out and pitch. And we try to get somebody to sponsor it. That's a very different temperament. Like again, talking about that lady whose video I was seeing today, it suits her temperament. She wants to be successful in that terms.
Yeah.
And it's great that they are doing that. Temperamentally, I'm not that person. I don't wake up every day thinking about success in financial terms, or success in terms of scale, or scale of work and scale of practice. So it's not like if I have 20 people in the office, suddenly I'll feel more better. Probably I'll feel worse. Growth, yes, we want to do larger work, work which has greater impact. We want to do more meaningful work. We want to do larger public projects, hopefully. But that also, it's never a key ingredient of a good project.
Yeah.
Or the only ingredient. Of course, you need resources. So yeah, go ahead.
No, I think it's very rightfully put, because growth has different meaning for different person, and of course your practice is an extension of yourself. So and I think the entire session had been quite wonderful. I wanted to thank you again for joining us for the session. It had been quite a reflective and a learning session. And I think students who listen to this, they will also learn a lot.
Thanks. Thanks. Well, I'm happy to.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you found Converse valuable, you can subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Also, please share your reviews on the show and the topics of discussions through comments. You can find all past episodes and know more about us on insyd.ai. See you in the next episode.